What's one moment in your life that changed everything in your family?
My parents canceled our Christmas plans to spend the holiday with my brother's new girlfriend, and I know that line sounds like something people say when they want strangers online to pat them on the head. But I am telling you plainly that after weeks of confirming schedules, after I bought the groceries for the meal I promised to cook, after I wrapped the gifts that I chose with care because I still believed effort meant something in our family, my mother called me and said they were going to Ethan's instead because Samantha had invited them, and it would be special for her first real holiday with us, and she said it in that soothing, reasonable tone she saves for moments when she is about to do something that would upset a normal person, yet she would prefer not to deal with the normal person's very normal reaction. I stayed quiet longer than she expected, because I have learned that silence makes people show you the part they usually keep hidden. And sure enough, she filled the space with a tidy story about how Samantha was planning a cute dessert and Ethan had bought a new set of lights, and they wanted to keep things simple this year. Which landed like a joke because the simplest plan would have been the plan we already had, and while she talked I looked at the list on my counter with the casserole dishes and the timing for the oven, and I felt that familiar pinch in my chest that I used to call sadness when I was younger and a lot more naive, but that I now recognize as the moment my brain starts deciding whether we are going to play this the way I always play it, or whether I am finally going to stop asking to be treated decently and start acting like a person who knows how to protect herself. I said I understood, because those words are the currency my family spends freely when they want me to subsidize their choices, and I let her hear a version of my voice that sounds supportive but not eager. Because I wanted her to relax into the idea that I would be fine alone and that there would be no cost for moving me off the board, and when she offered to swing by later in the week I told her not to worry about it, that I had a project to focus on. Which is true in the broad sense. Because the project was me, my boundaries, and the little machine in my head that sometimes acts like a lawyer and sometimes acts like a locksmith and occasionally acts like a pyromaniac who knows exactly which paper to light first. After I hung up I did something that past versions of me would never have done, not because it is cruel, but because it is clear, and clarity in my family is treated like aggression. So I opened a new group text with the people who usually come to my house on Christmas Eve: 2 aunts, 1 cousin, our family friend Joanne who has known my parents since they were young, and my parents themselves, and I wrote a short, polite message that said I was canceling the evening at my place because Mom and Dad had a change of plans and would be celebrating at Ethan's with Samantha, and to avoid any confusion I attached a screenshot of the message where my mother said exactly that. And I added a cheerful line about wishing everyone a peaceful holiday and hoping the new plan was lovely. Then I put the phone down and let the oxygen return to the room, because I had not attacked anyone. I had simply told the truth in a way that removed the usual wiggle room that lets people rewrite history a week later. The replies came faster than I expected, and there it was, the first wave of what I knew would be many. The guilt trips disguised as concern and understanding disguised as pressure, with my mother replying to the whole group that she was so sorry for the miscommunication and that she thought I might enjoy a quiet day for once, which would have been funny if it were not so insulting, and Joanne writing privately that she loved me and that this felt off, and my Aunt Linda asking if I needed company, which was generous, but also a reminder that I would have to hold my line, because if I folded now I would be helping them build the story that I am flexible and forgiving and ultimately grateful for crumbs. And I have chewed enough crumbs to know they do nothing for your appetite except make you forget what it feels like to sit at a table where the plate in front of you belongs to you. I made myself a simple dinner, and I did not perform my sadness for anyone, because I am done auditioning for empathy in a family that hands it out like coupons with expiration dates, and when my brother texted me right as the group chat was cooling, saying he hoped I was not mad and that Mom just wanted to make Samantha feel welcome, I answered with a line I knew would make him think, which was that welcoming one person does not require uninviting another, and then I wished them all a good night. And I turned off my phone, because one thing I have learned is that if you let people train you to respond immediately, you will start living on their schedule, and I am too old to keep handing over the remote. The next morning, which was Christmas Eve on my calendar and apparently rehearsal day on theirs, I opened my phone to a bright little storm of messages from my mother that were split between explanations and hints about how Grandma used to get overwhelmed and how I have always been so strong and independent. The subtext being that it is my job to be the adult when other adults want to be children. And while I read those messages, I remembered a conversation from a few weeks earlier when Samantha and I were alone in my kitchen, and she told me, very casually, that she was up for a promotion at her firm and that her boss likes family-type women, and that she was excited for my parents to fall in love with her. And the way she said it rang a bell I chose not to ignore, because ambition is not a crime, but using people as props is, at minimum, a red flag, and I have spent enough seasons ignoring red flags to know that they do not go away. They just turn into obligations with better lighting. So I did something small but effective, which was to forward my mother's miscommunication explanation to Joanne privately with a single line that said, "I think this speaks for itself." Because Joanne is the sort of person who believes in fairness and also has a memory like a file cabinet, and I knew that if my mother tried to retell this story next week as a misunderstanding, there would be at least one person in the room who could say, kindly but firmly, that the record shows otherwise, and if you think that is petty, then you have likely never been erased gently enough times to learn that records are not petty, they are protection. By late afternoon my father called, which he almost never does unless my mother is in the room giving him hand signals, and he said he hoped I was all right and that none of this was meant to hurt me. And I matched his calm with my own and said I appreciated the call and that I was good, really, and that we could talk after the holiday. And I could feel him trying to find an opening where I might offer to drop by or propose a compromise. But I did not hand him one, and when we hung up I felt that quiet click inside that tells me a door has locked in the right direction. I am telling you all of this because it sets the stage for what came next, which was not loud or dramatic or cruel, but it was smart, and it was mine. And it started with a message that popped up just before midnight from a mutual acquaintance who goes to the same gym as Samantha and follows the same social media circles. A message that said, "You should see what got posted about your brother and his girlfriend." And there was a screenshot attached that made my eyebrows go up and my heartbeat slow down. Not because it was scandalous in the trashy way, but because it was the kind of detail that could shift the way my parents talk about loyalty and image and respect, and I knew in that instant that if I played this correctly, I would not need to raise my voice to be heard. Christmas morning arrived with that strange quiet that usually feels peaceful when it is chosen and feels like a dare when it is handed to you, and I walked through my place with the calm that comes after a long night of telling yourself the truth. Because I had finally said out loud, even if only to myself, that I was not going to keep sponsoring other people's comfort with my time, my food, and my feelings, and if that sounded cold to anyone reading it from the outside, then they were free to keep their mouths shut unless they had lived through enough years of being told to be understanding, while someone else's needs were treated as sacred law. And as I made coffee and looked at the wrapped gifts stacked by the door with the neat little tags that I had written in good faith, I realized I did not want to carry those boxes into the new year like some unpaid invoice that I was too polite to send to collections. The phone started early, first with my mother's syrupy text about how she hoped I was treating myself today and how proud she was of me for being independent, which landed with the same weight as one of those backhanded compliments that are really just instructions disguised as affection, then with a picture from Ethan of his tree and a joke about how Samantha had saved Christmas because she found the last roll of gold ribbon, followed by the first guilt-tripping phone call that came from a blocked number because my mother has learned that I screen her when she is in this mood, and I let it ring out while I lined up the gifts and opened my laptop to pull the receipts, because it hit me that the most powerful thing I could do right now, short of marching into their living room and scolding everyone like a camp counselor, was to redirect the meaning of my labor away from a day that had been taken from me without consent and toward a place where generosity does not have to pass through someone else's opinion before it counts. I loaded the trunk with the presents and the non-perishables I had stocked up for the menu that would not be cooked, and I drove to the shelter where I drop off donations a few times a year, a place run by women who speak in the plain language of needs and solutions rather than the complicated poetry my family prefers when they want to avoid responsibility. And I told the woman at intake that everything was new and unused and could be given as holiday gifts, and I asked if she would please, if possible, accept them as anonymous donations in honor of my parents' names, which she wrote down without asking nosy questions. And then I stood there for a minute with my hands in my pockets and felt the air clear in my chest in that way it does when you actually do the thing you know is right for you instead of the thing that keeps everyone else's story intact. And I realized that this was the first small act of revenge that did not look like revenge because it required no scene, no accusation, no proof beyond my own decision to stop handing out unlimited credit to people who treat my effort like a background service. On the way back, I pulled into the grocery store and returned what I could, not because I needed the cash, but because I wanted the bank record that would later show a line of refunds on Christmas Day. A quiet ledger that would outlast any speech my mother might give about misunderstandings and miscommunications, and when I got home I took a single photo of the empty counter and the printed receipts laid side by side. Nothing performative or dramatic. Just two facts placed next to each other so that later, if anyone tried to say I had overreacted, I would be able to show that I had simply rerouted my plans with the precision of someone who knows that documentation is the only language some people respect. The group chat revived itself around lunchtime with an almost comical mix of cheer and pressure, with Joanne sending me a simple heart and my Aunt Linda checking whether she could stop by for coffee, which was kind but also a temptation to soften my stance, and with my mother dropping a long message about how she hoped I knew this decision was about welcoming Samantha and not excluding me, and how family sometimes has to make space for new people and how I of all people would understand that. And I let it sit until the afternoon while I watched a movie and folded laundry and thought about how many years I had given them my weekends and my talents and my calm, and then I wrote one careful message that thanked everyone for the invitations, explained that I had made other plans for the day, and added that I would be unavailable until after the holiday, which read polite and final, the digital equivalent of closing a door without slamming it. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, because the universe loves rhythm, Samantha texted me for the first time that day with a bright, chirpy note about hoping I was enjoying some me time, which made me laugh out loud because it takes a special kind of confidence to uninvite someone and then congratulate them on their self-care. And then she added a little line about how she could not wait to talk to me about a favor. Something about needing help shaping a small family moment for social media because her firm liked seeing values, and she wrote that word with the kind of casual entitlement that tells you everything. And I sat there staring at the screen thinking about that conversation in my kitchen a few weeks back when she told me she needed my parents to love her because it would help the promotion, and it clicked for me that I was not just a sister-in-law candidate to her. I was a resource, a consultant, a convenient woman on standby to polish the narrative so her boss would see the right kind of glow. I drafted a response and then I deleted it, because if you reply in the heat of insult you almost always throw away leverage, and instead I opened my notes app and I wrote down every detail I remembered from her earlier confession. The way she framed the promotion as an image test, the names she dropped, the little phrase about family-type women, and I took screenshots of the new text and saved them to the same folder where I had placed the receipts and the picture of my counter, because one thing about being the person who always understands is that you also tend to become the person who knows where the bones are buried. And if I was going to change the way this family treated me, then I needed to stop acting like evidence is petty and start behaving like strategy is kindness to myself. Late afternoon became evening, and I cooked something simple for me, nothing festive, just food, and I played music I like, and I let the house be quiet in a way that felt chosen again, and the phone kept buzzing with the small theater of my mother's conscience. And I held my line until just after dark when a name popped up that I had not seen on my screen in a while, an old family friend who floats between circles and tends to know things before other people do, and the message was short and almost gleeful in that way people get when they think they are delivering useful gossip with a bow on top, and it said that I might want to look at a post that had been making the rounds in the local professional group. Something about Samantha and a timeline and a tag that did not match the clean story my parents were already rehearsing, and there was a screenshot attached that made me sit down and breathe slowly because it was not crude or cruel. It was simply incompatible with the image she was selling and the approval my parents were handing out on credit. I did not respond right away, and I did not forward it to anyone, and I did not tell myself some moral bedtime story about taking the high road, because high roads are lovely concepts that often lead back to the same place if you are driving alone. Instead, I put the screenshot in the folder with the receipts and the notes and the earlier texts, and I stared at the screen long enough to feel the piece slide into place, the way a key turns when you finally stop pretending the lock is broken, and I decided that if my family wanted to tell stories, then I would let them, but I would also make sure that when the story reached me, I would be holding something more useful than outrage. And, because revenge, to be worth doing, should teach people something they will not forget, I sent one message before midnight to the group chat wishing them all a warm evening and a safe drive home. And at the end I added a single line that said I would be unavailable tomorrow as well because I had a deadline, which was true in the way that matters. Since the deadline was the end of my habit of making it easy for everyone else to do what they wanted while I smiled and made room, and when I turned off the lights and put my phone on the table, it buzzed one more time with Ethan's name and an impatient, "Call me when you can," which I ignored, because the next conversation we were going to have would not be on his timeline, and it would not be in his language. And it would not end the way he has learned to expect. The morning after my quiet Christmas, I woke up with that steady feeling you get when you know you have something useful in your pocket and you are not in a rush to spend it. Because the screenshot sitting in my folder was not some messy scandal that would spray shrapnel in every direction. It was a clean inconsistency about timelines and claims and a professional post that did not match the story Samantha had been promoting to my parents and, by extension, to anyone who would listen, and I knew, as surely as I know my own voice, that in our family what people fear most is not anger or distance, it is embarrassment, the slow public realization that the story they told with confidence is not holding up under daylight. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started checking the source on the post the way a person checks a lock they already know is secure, following the dates, reading the comments, looking for edits, saving an archive copy so that if it vanished I would still have the exact page, because I was not going to be the one who lunged first and then apologized for leaping without looking. I wanted the truth to stand on its own feet, without my fingerprints, without my voice, without a caption that made me look like the bitter sister who could not handle being replaced on a holiday. Once I had the records where I wanted them, I sent a light message to Joanne asking if she was going to the usual Sunday coffee crowd next week and whether the group included our family friends from church who happen to be my mother's most enthusiastic audience when she is in storytelling mode. And when Joanne said yes and asked whether I was planning to come, I told her I might swing by if I was free. Then I put the phone down and drafted a different message to a woman named Carla who runs a small networking group my parents love to name drop, the sort of person who posts reminders about professional ethics and reputation management, and I sent her a link to the public post with a neutral line that said, "This seems like a teachable moment about public claims and private timelines. Thought your group might find it interesting," and I signed it with my full name and nothing else, because the trick here was not to scream. The trick was to place a small stone at the top of a hill and let gravity do what it always does. Before noon, the link started collecting comments from people who recognized the firm and understood the stakes, and within an hour the original poster, an associate from a different department, added a clarifying note that made the mismatch even sharper without mentioning Samantha by name, which to me was perfect, because it turned the focus onto integrity without looking like a personalized attack. And somewhere around that same time my mother texted me a cheerful photo from Ethan's living room with the caption that family was everything and how grateful she felt for new beginnings, and I sat there looking at the picture and thinking about how grateful I felt for documented endings. By late afternoon my phone rang with my father's number, and I let it go to voicemail because I did not need a live conversation to tell me what had begun to leak into their circle. Instead, I listened to his message about how there had been a misunderstanding about some online thing and how people like to make mountains out of molehills, and I could hear my mother in the background saying to make sure I knew they loved me, which would have been touching if love did not habitually arrive in our house right after the rumor mill had already fired up, and I replied hours later with a simple line saying I hoped they were having a calm day and that the internet is rarely generous, which was the truth and also a way to confirm that I was not the source. Because part of winning here was making it clear that the world is not a stage where I need to perform my anger to make a point. The world is a system where people learn by consequence. Early evening brought the text I had been waiting for, not from my mother or father, but from Samantha herself, a long paragraph styled as a friendly check-in that quickly pivoted into a plea for help, something about a confusing post that people were sharing around and how she knew I had contacts who could correct the narrative, and she sprinkled it with the same language she had used in my kitchen about values and family image, and how this was a big week for her. And as I read it, I felt a calm decision settle over me, the decision to stop doing free crisis management for people who would not lift a finger if I were the one on fire. I wrote back that I hoped she was okay and that my best advice, given my work experience, was to correct the facts internally rather than try to massage them externally, because external control almost always backfires and makes the truth louder. I said it in the same friendly tone she had used with me, and I added that, for what it was worth, my parents respond well to honesty when it comes in full sentences, which is both accurate and strategic, because if she decided to go the honesty route, it would collide directly with whatever version Ethan and my parents had already agreed to tell, and if she decided to spin harder, it would only place her deeper into the one problem she cannot afford within their social world, which is looking like a person who thinks the rules are flexible. Within minutes Ethan called, and when I did not pick up he sent a series of messages that moved from breezy to brittle, the last one saying he knew I was behind this and that I needed to stop, and I took a breath and typed a response that read like a sister trying to keep things calm, saying that I had not posted anything and that if a public timeline was inconsistent with private claims, the fix was not to silence people but to align the facts. And then I added one final line that I knew would stick in his head, which was that the problem with building a holiday around image is that image cannot carry the weight of family when the facts start wobbling. He called again after midnight, angry enough that his voice had that tight hiss he uses when he knows he cannot shout because someone is within earshot, and he said he needed me to promise to stay out of this, and I told him I had kept my hands remarkably clean, and that if he wanted to keep things from spreading he might begin at the source, and I let the silence after that do its work, because silence is not passive when the other person needs you to fill it. Silence is a mirror that forces them to look at their own face. The next morning my mother invited me to dinner at their place later in the week so we could reset, and she used that word like it was a warm blanket, and I told her I would check my schedule and let her know. Which was honest, because what I needed to check was not my calendar but my timing, since it was clear that a room was being set up where they would try to reconstruct the narrative with all the usual props, and I was not going to walk in without the final piece of my plan ready to drop, not with a bang, not with a confession, but with a simple, unavoidable truth placed gently on the table at exactly the moment when they thought everything had been smoothed over. In the days that followed, everything about my parents' tone shifted in that careful way people use when they are trying to keep a dam from cracking. With my mother calling under the banner of concern and slipping in little questions about what I had heard and where I had heard it, and my father volunteering errands he never volunteers as a way of proving that we were all fine, and my brother alternating between charm and warning depending on who was within earshot, and I kept my voice level and my sentences long and unhelpful, because I was not going to be the person who filled in the blanks for them. I was going to let the blanks sit there and make them uncomfortable. And in that quiet I noticed something I had not allowed myself to notice before, which is that when I am not the one smoothing everything, their machinery squeals and grinds and throws sparks, because it has always been my job to be the oil and the rag and the wrench. And now I was just a witness. Samantha reached out again with that chirpy cadence that hides urgency, asking whether she should post a warm little note about the values of telling the truth and how sometimes the internet gets things wrong, and I could feel the edge of panic under her punctuation. So I replied in a tone even a corporate coach would admire, telling her that clarity beats charm every time, and that if a timeline is messy the only way through is to say exactly what happened and own the parts that are not pretty. Because audiences forgive what they see coming out of a person's own mouth more than what arrives through a publicist's template, and she thanked me like I had handed her a magic wand and said she would draft something and run it by a colleague. And I told her that was wise while I opened my notes and wrote down the date and time of our exchange, because I was done giving advice without keeping a record of who asked and who used it. That afternoon, I made another small move that looked like kindness on the surface and was, in fact, kindness to myself even if it created discomfort for others. Because I sent a short email to the shelter director thanking her for accepting the gifts and letting her know she could, if it helped their donors feel seen, acknowledge the donation publicly as a holiday contribution made in honor of my parents by their daughter. And I added that if they preferred to keep it anonymous, that was fine as well, and she responded with gratitude and said a general thank you post went up each week and that she would include that language if I approved, which I did, not to embarrass anyone but to place a small, undeniable truth into the world. The truth that while my parents were playing host to an image, their daughter spent the morning turning what had been meant for a family table into relief for people who needed it, and if that truth caused a few awkward conversations in their circle, well, awkwardness is a fair tutor. By early evening, the public clarification I had predicted appeared, and it was almost impressive in its corporate neatness. A short message from Samantha about a previous role she had described in a way that might have sounded like leadership when it was more of a support function, and about a start date that had been aspirational rather than actual, and about how exciting it is to be part of a team where growth is possible, and I read it twice not because it was surprising, but because it was exactly the sort of thing my parents refuse to process unless they are forced to do it in front of witnesses. I did not respond to her, I did not forward it, I did not add a caption. I simply saved a copy and sat with the knowledge that the narrative had just shifted without me lifting anything heavier than a suggestion. And within an hour my mother called and left a message about how people can be so cruel online and how she knew I would never take part in that, and I let her words sit there. While I answered an email from the shelter that included a draft of their weekly thank you, which named my parents and the fact that their daughter donated holiday gifts in their honor, and asked whether they could tag my mother's book club page since many of those women also donate, and I said yes, because truth plus credit is the combination that makes people pay attention. The next morning, I woke up to the shelter's post being shared by Joe and with a simple line that said our town is full of quiet generosity, and in the comments a few women from my mother's circle praised the idea of honoring family by giving to others. And one of them tagged my mother directly with a heart, which would have been sweet if it had not landed like a reminder that generosity is a choice and not a slogan, and hardly an hour later my father texted to say that the family should have dinner at their house to talk, that it would be nice to reset the year and start fresh, and he used that phrase start fresh like a magic spell that wipes the slate without washing the hands. And I replied that I could come if we kept it early because I had a work obligation in the morning, which was true and also useful because endings are easier to control when you set a clock at the beginning. Ethan beat the dinner invitation by sending me a warning wrapped in a joke, saying he hoped I would not bring an audience to dinner, and he attached a smile that did not reach any real feeling. And I answered that if the truth requires an audience, then the truth probably wants to be heard, and he tried to pivot into charm by asking whether I would help Samantha repair her standing with my parents. Just a few lines to Mom about how people misunderstand ambitious women, and I told him I had already given my best advice and that the rest was on them, and then, because revenge without a lesson is just noise, I added that when you cancel on someone in service of image, you should expect the bill to arrive eventually. And if that sounded dramatic to him, he could sit with it until he figured out why. By late afternoon, Samantha texted again, this time without cheer, saying that my mother had asked some pointed questions about the clarification and about how certain claims had been framed at dinner. And she wanted to know what I thought my mother wanted to hear tonight, and I told her, in the same calm tone I have used all along, that my mother respects specifics, that she hears dates, tasks, and names. I also told her, because it mattered, that my parents are not actually protecting her. They are protecting the version of themselves who never makes mistakes, and that if she stops auditioning for that version and simply says what happened, she will be fine with people who matter, and if she decides to keep polishing, she should at least learn where the edges are. Because cuts from your own mirror are still cuts. An hour later, as I was putting on shoes and collecting the folder that held my small archive of receipts and messages and screenshots, the quiet paper trail of a woman who finally decided that memory needs allies. My phone buzzed with a notification that made me pause. A new comment on the shelter post from one of my mother's closest friends who wrote that she was moved by how I had turned a painful family moment into something generous and that she hoped we would all find our way back to each other with more honesty than before, and I stood there and let that line sink in because it said out loud what no one inside my family would dare say. And then a text from my mother landed inviting me to come a little early because Samantha wanted to apologize before we all sat down, and I smiled without warmth, because apologies before dinner in our house are not apologies, they are rehearsals. And I was bringing the one thing rehearsals cannot survive, which is a simple question asked at the right moment with the right witnesses present. So I locked my door, put the folder in my bag, and drove to my parents' house with the calm that comes from knowing that revenge done right is not a scene, it is a shift, and as I parked I saw Ethan's car and the unfamiliar license plate that I knew belonged to Samantha. And my phone buzzed once more with a message from a colleague of hers, a woman I had spoken to years ago at a conference, who wrote that my note about teaching moments had been useful and that the firm's partners had appreciated the public clarification, which told me exactly how the air would feel inside that dining room, and I walked up the path already knowing the first sentence I would say after we sat down. A single line that would sound polite and patient and would move the center of gravity of this family by an inch, which is all you need when everyone at the table is pretending not to notice the table has tilted. They had the table set like a peace offering and the voices pitched at that careful volume people use when they want to come across as calm without admitting they are managing a situation. And Samantha stood up first with a quick smile that did not sit anywhere real and said she wanted to apologize, and I nodded because I have learned that forcing speed onto an apology only makes it sloppier. Then I asked the only question that matters when someone tells you they are sorry, which is what exactly are you apologizing for? And I watched the sentence get stuck in the doorway of her mouth because specificity is a tight fit when you have built the last few weeks on carefully arranged generalities. And she tried to say it was for the confusion around the holidays, then pivoted to say it was for the way the online thing had been interpreted, and I let the silence do its work until she finally said the line I needed her to say. That she had framed a couple of facts in a way that made her look more established than she was, and that she understood how that might have influenced my parents' decision to make the holiday feel bigger at their place, which landed in the room like a heavy box nobody wanted to admit they had carried inside. My mother jumped in with the kind of soothing tone she saves for delicate surgeries where the goal is to remove the problem without leaving a scar anyone can see, saying that everyone had acted from a place of love and that misunderstandings happen and that none of this was meant to hurt me, and I told her I heard what she was saying and that I was not interested in whether anyone meant to hurt me. I was interested in whether anyone here was willing to tell the truth in plain language so that we do not have to keep repeating this pattern until we are old enough to forget how it started, and I slid my phone across the table with the screen lit on the group text from the day she canceled, and I said the truth begins here. And I asked her to read her own words out loud, not as punishment but as an anchor, and she read them in a small voice and then tried to add context, and I told her I was not asking for context, I was asking for accuracy. Because accuracy is the only ground where respect can stand without wobbling. Ethan cleared his throat with that performative patience he uses when he wants to signal that he is being the bigger person, and he said we should let the past be the past and talk about how to move forward, and I said moving forward is exactly what we are doing. But moving forward without naming the thing we are stepping over only guarantees we will trip on it again. Then I turned to Samantha and said I was not here to manage her promotion, I was not here to fix her timeline, I was not here to make my parents like her on command. I was here because my role in this family has been the fixer and the buffer and the person who receives explanations as if they were gifts, and that role has been retired. And I watched the sentence land in each of them in a different way, because people hear loss more clearly when it is their convenience being taken off the table. My father, who avoids specifics unless they belong to golf or bills, asked what I needed in order to feel better, and I said I do not barter for feelings anymore. I set terms for participation. And the terms are simple and achievable if anyone wants me in the room without resentment, and I laid them out with the calm you use when you read directions to a person who insists the box should build itself, starting with this: when plans are made with me. Cancellations are treated as cancellations, and not as misunderstandings, which means if you cancel, you say you canceled, and you say it to the people who were affected, not just to me privately while you write a different story publicly. Second, holidays are not built around anyone's image, which means favors for social media or for bosses or for anyone else will not be sourced from me, and I will not be the person who makes the room look balanced while someone else eats the biggest slice of the benefit. Third, and this is not a threat, just a fact, if anyone tries to recast me as bitter or dramatic for insisting on those two simple standards, I will answer with daylight by sharing the original messages without commentary, because daylight is not cruelty, daylight is prevention. My mother asked if that meant I wanted an apology in the family chat, and I said no, I do not want theater. I want a record, and a record is one sentence that says what happened without dressing it up, so I asked her to send, tonight, to the exact group I had messaged on Christmas Eve, a plain note that says we canceled on Melissa to go to Ethan's. She let us know she would be spending the holiday on her own, and we appreciate the donation she made in our honor because it turned a painful moment into something that helped other people, and I watched her face wobble at the idea of writing a sentence that straightforward, and I watched my father look relieved to have a task he could complete. And I watched Ethan trying to calculate how this would play with the people who rely on him to be the guy who never appears to be wrong. Samantha tried a last small pivot to charm, saying she hoped we could all move past the internet thing because it had been a learning experience for her, and she looked at me like I might toss her a rope, and I told her the rope is very simple and very short. It is called do not treat people as set pieces in your career story, and if you do not ask the person you set aside to polish the edges for you when it goes sideways, and she nodded, not because she agreed, but because she understood the terms, which for tonight was enough. When dinner arrived, my mother made a show of sitting next to me as if placement proved affection, and I let it happen because I was done teaching lessons through small refusals when a clear statement had already done the job. And halfway through the meal, I took out the folder from my bag, and I did not spread the contents around like a prosecutor. I simply placed the top page face down in front of me as a reminder that memory now has help. And I turned to my parents and said one last thing that mattered, which is that I love you and I am not leaving, I am just not subsidizing. And if you cannot tell the difference, then you will feel abandoned when what you are actually experiencing is adulthood knocking on the door of a house that has run on my unpaid labor for too many years. After coffee, my father asked whether I wanted to write the sentence for the group chat or whether he should type it, and I told him to type it in his own words as long as they were truthful, and he did. Slowly and out loud, the way you do when you are trying not to make a mistake, and when he hit send, my mother's phone buzzed and Joanne's heart reacted in the chat, and my Aunt Linda wrote that honesty was a good start and that she loved us. And I felt the click of that internal lock again, the one that tells you the door is now closing in the right direction. I stood to leave before anyone could start a new conversation that would pull us back into soft language and half promises. And Ethan walked me to the door with the look of a man who understands that the next time he wants to reposition the family pieces for a photo, he will have to do it without the one person who knows how to make the background hold. And Samantha said she hoped we could have coffee sometime, just the two of us, and I told her maybe after the promotion review if she still wants to hear what integrity sounds like when it is not performing, and my mother hugged me a little too hard and said she would call tomorrow, and I told her to text first, because I manage my time now. And I stepped outside feeling no triumphal fireworks and no cold satisfaction, just the steady, grounded truth that I had stopped making it easy, that the record now exists, and that the next time anyone in this family tries to build a holiday on a story instead of a commitment, they will hear my voice asking the same small question that ended the rehearsal tonight, which is what exactly are you apologizing for, and they will know that the answer, this time, needs to fit the facts.